the event series that we're starting with in Singapore, which is Age of Perspectives, Digital Disruptors, and the Power of Partnerships. It's our pleasure to be running these events across Asia together with the support of Telstra, and Telstra make a perfect partner for this event series given the theme and their global expertise in the digital services and developing partnerships across the globe with different companies.
So this is the Advanced panel. Thanks to Telstra, muru-D and Advanced for putting on. It's great to be in this space. It's great to be hosted here. So huge thanks also again to Jamie for putting it on.
I am the head of our enterprise business internationally, so that gives me the fortunate pleasure of spending most time outside of Australia and outside of Singapore, travelling around the world. So I sort of look after a few hundred people in 20 odd countries around the world, which does give me a perspective on what's happening elsewhere outside of Asia in the digital space. I have a long-standing career in Telstra, 17 years, and I've seen an awful lot of change in that time, which I'm sure we'll come on to as the next evolution of digital.
Yeah, I'm Rob. I work at DBS Bank here in Singapore, and I've been here for about 6 years. My background is a bit unusual for someone working in a bank. I'm quite happy to have that background. 20 years ago, well, is that long ago? 20 years ago when I did a graphic design degree down in Melbourne, I left that course, was a brand designer, ran my own business a bit here and there, bummed around Melbourne, freelancing at different agencies, moved into web and digital. And it was about 2000, I think it was then, and I was doing some digital work for Telstra and White Pages and Census and those kind of guys. Did a lot of great, and then moved to digital strategy as well. So really evolved from being a design person into a digital design strategy guy. Somehow, for the life of me, not sure, got interested in the world of financial services. If you're thinking about doing it, don't do it. But got interested in the idea of this sort of broader world around us. Being in Melbourne, it's a very sort of small place at the bottom right corner of the map, and was more interested in the world, and so moved into a bank there in Melbourne. Then came up to Singapore with OCBC at the time, actually, and then moved to DBS recently. So a really interesting path, and it's great now that I can work in a big corporate like DBS, and having a design background is something that's valued. It wasn't that way 10 years ago, I believe, but it wasn't something that was understood 10 years ago. And places like this and the things that DBS are doing is a great reaction from the corporate world to what we can achieve if we have different backgrounds. So.
Hi, good evening everyone. I'm Anna, and I'm the CEO and founder of Cresco Data. We're a Singapore-based startup, about a year and a half old, and we're in the e-commerce space. So we built a cloud-based platform that helps retailers distribute their products across multiple digital channels. So we push products into marketplaces, both globally, like Amazon and eBay, but also regionally, so Lazada, Zalora, Q10. We also push products into shopping comparison sites, into dynamic creative for digital advertising, and also into Facebook Dynamic. So I've been in Singapore for about 3.5 years now. Came over with my husband's job, and at the time when I moved here, I just sort of started out mentoring on the startup scene and kind of realised the opportunity to build and grow a startup in this region, and also the fact that particularly sort of in the industry that I'm in, e-commerce, it's just on a massive growth curve. So opportunity is immense, which makes sort of focus very challenging. My background is many years in digital. So started out in telco in the UK about 17 years ago. So at that time, digital didn't sort of exist as a word. I was just sort of delivering products that were sort of challenging traditional business models. So moving from delivering voice services to data services. I moved to Sydney about 12 years ago, and again, typical POM, gets to Australia and thinks, why didn't I come here earlier? So now have an Aussie passport, and in Australia I worked in a variety of companies. So I worked in telco, in agencies, and also at Yahoo. And in all of those roles, basically, I was sort of the disruptor. So I was working within a big organisation, initiating change. So change in the way they did business, and particularly at Yahoo, working very closely with 7 West, so with the media properties, looking at how we could mobilise both Pacific Magazine Group and also Channel 7 shows. Another part of my role at Yahoo was also managing partnerships, particularly telco partnerships. So I managed Telecom New Zealand, and so in Telecom New Zealand it was a pretty similar partnership to Yahoo 7, as in it was a joint venture. So it was Yahoo Extra in New Zealand, and that was a JV with TNZ. So it was interesting to move into a company that was the digital arm of a bigger, more traditional company and see that approach. Before moving to Singapore, I actually had a change in career and moved into government. So I've sort of seen disruption and partnerships across sort of the whole ecosystem. And in my role at UK Trade and Investment, we helped tech businesses expand into the UK. So a lot of partnerships in that role. So partnerships with state and federal government, partnerships and collaborations with universities, looking at how we could commercialise innovation in the UK, partnerships with industry bodies, partnerships with trade organisations, so a whole range of partnerships.
So my name is Miranda. Believe it or not, I'm actually the CEO for Southeast Asia for the IAB, which is the Interactive Advertising Bureau. So we are the association that brings together the government, brands, publishers, agencies and platforms to drive investment in digital. At the moment in Singapore, believe it or not, it sits at around 10%. Considering we are mobile first, that to me is almost offensive, but also inspires me every single day. I have a little secret to tell you. I was born in Australia. Oh no. I grew up in New Zealand. Yay! Where all good people come from. I may or may not have dated a certain All Black and inspired his entire career, but I'll leave that up to you guys to Google. So, working in the not-for-profit space is so inspiring. Living in Singapore is hands down the most fascinating place to be in the world at the moment. We recently expanded into Indonesia and Malaysia, and I love this region. Before I was here, I lived in New York for a few years. I was in a global role for an agency, working on new business. So I worked on any pitches that had more than 2 regions. And it taught me a lot in terms of understanding how to broker partnerships and how to broker partnerships with the new and emerging tech and digital companies that are happening. The one thing I can say to you all, if I can give one piece of advice, is appreciate expertise. Exposure is nothing. Because do you know what? You say, oh, I'll give you this for exposure. I go down to buy a drink at the end of the night and I'm like, can I pay you an exposure? And they're like, fuck no. Appreciate people for what they're.
So Telstra and the partnership with The Economist have done a global study looking really at the issue of digital disruption and the power of partnership. And one of the things I took out from that was this statement of, it's not what you know, it's who you know that makes the difference. So could you take us through a little bit about what Telstra learned from that study from a global perspective? Maybe the implications for Singapore and how that relates to where we are at Miranda.
Because we are a company that's evolving, and I think digital is changing everything, and I think what's happening in Australia and the economics and the dynamics of the landscape in Australia and what the government's doing with the NBN means that we have no choice but to embrace partnership and change. And I think, I said I've 17 years in the company, very, very different organisation to when I started. Actually, my first job in Telstra was knocking on doors in the M25, inside the M25 in London, selling cheap minutes. We've evolved a bit from there. Your job was to go and get a BT phone bill, bring it back, and then go back to the customer and say, I can save you 20%. Things have moved on, yeah. But you know, for us now in this part of the world, we have no choice but to expand. Our income from international is only about 5%, which is well underweight for most global telcos. And our ambition is that over the coming years, we don't like to define the timeframes it might take longer because it's going to take some scale acquisitions. We want that to be more like 15 to 20%. And that's going to happen in a number of ways. One of the things we did do recently was acquire a company called PacNet. That gave us basically, with Telstra and PacNet, about a third of the internet traffic now in Asia runs over our submarine cable systems. So by default, we're providing infrastructure to the digital world. But in addition to that, we're trying to get for a diversified portfolio of growth internationally, and that's going to be more acquisitions, which we'll look to do for scale. You know, we have entry points, midpoints, and what I talked about were really the scale plays. The midpoints, which is all about digital, is really where we look to Silicon Valley, and we've got some people there. We've got people in Australia and across Asia where we're looking to invest in digital assets. And so far, in our ventures group, we've probably invested, no press here, quote, about 350 million across about 20 assets. And next door to here is Uyala. That's an example of a digital asset. And we've got people like Coney who make platforms for mobile applications, Whisper on messaging platforms, DocuSign for electronic signature, take a stake in that. So we take small stakes, which the initial thing is it helps us on productivity. So we are 40,000, and most Australians would suggest we're inefficient. We're actually getting efficient, and we use technology and digital to create efficiency for ourselves. But from a selling point of view, and my job is running a lot of the sales organisations around the world, we take it to customers and try and create that efficiency for customers. And then when you come down one level to the entry point is muru-D. And muru-D is our first entry point to the accelerator market in global. We started off in Australia about 3 years ago, I think. 3 or 4? Jamie's gone. 3 years ago. I think we've had 3 or 4 waves go through in Sydney. We started here in Singapore, and we've got our first class wave going through, and if you like, the graduation is the 21st of March. We've got ambitions for India and for other destinations where really it's not probably about whether we're going to find the next Jack Ma. It's more about how do we become part of the community, but how do we find something that's just different for us. And they're not necessarily telecoms related people who are in here. We've got people through this class who are building platforms. If you want a cleaner in Singapore in 2 hours, you go on the platform, you find a cleaner in 2 hours. We've got a healthcare company out in the Philippines. We've got our friend who's on the conference call in there from Russia who does vending machine applications. Are very, very diverse. And I suppose for us, my point of view on it is you need a balanced portfolio. We realise some will fail, some will succeed, some will do better than others. But in all of it, if you've got a balanced portfolio, you've got a better chance of doing it. And in our case, we're clearly a technology company, and we're fortunate because of what we spin off from Australia that we've got quite a bit of cash to invest, and that's what we're looking to do, to try to get that growth on our international business through a balanced portfolio. And much of it now is about digital.
The fintech industry, which is more a reaction out of the GFC, the financial crisis of 2008, has really spawned a whole bunch of people who've left the industry and gone, screw you banks, I'm going to do a startup that will take your business away. For the incumbents in the big banks, there's a very clear message there, which is, well, we can't simply ignore that. So the partnership is both forced, but it's also a massive opportunity. And digital is clearly, of all the industries I'm sure in this room, banking should be the most digital industry of all. And so we realised that we're just pushing numbers around a ledger, essentially, when it comes down to it. So we're trying to find new ways to do that better. Last year we sponsored Startup Bootcamp FinTech. I'm not sure if you know that. The man there, Amar, was in the cohort last year. Did a great job. Was one of the stars last year for the Startup Bootcamp FinTech, and essentially we sponsored that. And the idea was to exactly to Andy's point, we sponsor it so we can be part of the community. So, and the best benefit we found out of being involved in the best benefit we found out of being involved in that was not the actual stuff that came out of it. The best benefit was our senior leaders spending time with startups. That was the biggest cultural transformation we could imagine. Was the head of GTS and the head of GTB and the head of IBG and all those acronyms you can come up with a flip of a coin, sitting with a startup going, how do they do that in 48 hours? How do they do that so quickly and they get something done? In our bank that would take 6 months. So the partnership is both marketing, it's also new ideas, it's also how to solve problems really quickly. I can imagine Telstra, I presume, would be benefiting from it as well. We're doubling down on that a bit. So what we're doing this year is at the end of last year we ran a pre-accelerator. So Startup Bootcamp FinTech was the accelerator. We run a thing called Hotspot, which is a pre-accelerator. And that exercise has a few goals. One is to get someone who's got an idea to then build it into a business of some description. which is then can go into an accelerator. The criteria there is they have to be Singaporean. We don't want necessarily to fly people in from everywhere else. We want to really encourage great entrepreneurs here in Singapore. Being a Singaporean bank, we really want to support the local startup scene. And the second benefit really is to give the resources that we have to let those ideas flourish. Some of it is money. There's no doubt about it. Some of it is people, time, resources. But the $10 million over 5 years is the least we can do to help support the local startup scene. It's actually essentially crappy. It's not a lot of money for the bank over 5 years, right? It's not really. It's a lot of money.
Who would like $10 million? Because it's just, you know, it's going to leave behind. You won't even listen.
It's honestly, look, but if you ask the CEO of a lot of banks, they'd say, look, if I want to make $10 million, if I want to make that in 5 years' time, or want to get a 10x return, I'll put it into the capital markets. I'll do a corporate deal. I'll find other ways. There's much less risky ways than to get a return on that. So it's not really about that. And again, it's the least we can do to support the local industry. So for us, it's a fantastic multilateral benefit. It is a long-term commitment. But the really big benefit is we get all the benefit. We get all the cultural change, we get all the insights. Our CEO is incredibly enlightened about where this is all going. And from the top down, it's supported. So very hopeful that everyone here can benefit from that somehow.
That's a very interesting question, because a lot of the clients that we're trying to sell into are obviously big corporates, and unless they've agreed to change from the top down, and that's kind of ingrained in their culture, it's going to take a long time. So I think sort of as a startup, you want to move quickly, you need to meet your targets, and particularly if you're bootstrapping, you need to get those sales through the door. So the challenge is when working with big corporations is that sales cycle is going to take so much longer. You know, you're looking at a 12-month sales cycle, because you've got to help the person that you're dealing with. You've got to help them educate their manager. And I guess sort of one of the benefits that I've certainly found from being on both sides of the fence is that I understand that process. And a lot of the times when we're working with larger clients, we'll really help to educate them, and we'll also help them with their business plan. So we'll help them prepare what they need to sell the idea into their managers. But I think the other key thing as well is you've got to be patient. So you need to invest time in that education process, in valuing the potential of that partnership, because whilst you might have a conversation with someone, you might prepare lots of work and really assist them with the business case, they might come back to you in sort of 6 to 12 months' time and then suddenly say, we're ready now, we get what you were saying, and now we've got buy-in from senior management.
See, one thing I've seen that's quite exciting is when I joined the IAB 2 years ago, we had about 20 members. Since then, we've grown to over 90. We've got all the major players. We have Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, but we've also got some of the really exciting startups such as Miranda Labs, who specialise in OGT, and some of the more specialised data companies like Iota. These are the people who I think are really changing the game, and they're certainly influencing the way that major players are working. What I try to do is give voice to the people who are independent and specialised and very smart, and how they can, it's not a yours or mine, there's no combativeness, it's all right to the top. That's certainly the way that I see it, and I've really seen that happen. And also another thing that we are so passionate about in Singapore is unlocking Singaporean talent. We are really proud that in 2015 alone, we trained over 2,000 people in this industry. As a not-for-profit, you will see 13 to 15 market experts for $99. We could go out there and compete with the major sort of corporate events, but that's not who we are. We're here because we genuinely believe that the minds here are amazing, and we will do anything to help you go to work the next day and be a rock star.
What is the single most important or useful partnership we've been able to create to help you, surmount some of those problems?
Right, so we've recently just rolled out in Indonesia and Malaysia, and the key thing we found out is we partnered with their local associations. We showed respect, we respected due. We didn't go in telling them what is needed, because it's a more mature market. We listen to them first and then try and fill their gaps.
So in terms of partnerships for us, obviously we're a small company, we're a small team. So the challenge is how do we expand across the region? So we developed a couple of strategic partnerships, one with an e-commerce platform who has helped us expand into India. So we're using their sales team, their platform, and they're just using white labelling our technology, and that has enabled us to launch into a market that we could never have even dreamed of entering.
With DBS, I think the challenge is that when we're entering a market, we're usually trying to challenge the incumbents there. So the banks or the local players are helpful to a degree. We find it's useful to partner with adjacent industries. It could be an airline, a hotel, a retailer, or a telco, of course. So, but for Nextbank, for me, for conference business, we rely on government partners. We rely on global brands like Visa and others. So, all those brands and groups are really crucial. We definitely could not be successful in those different parts of Asia on our own, for sure.
Yeah, and we're in probably the same as banking, one of the most heavily regulated industries in the world. So you have to have partners. You need to understand every market for what it is, and you need to understand whether you can go in on your own or you're going in with a partner. So by market, you've got to select the right entry point. And for us, for example, in Indonesia, you look at Indonesia and we're pretty advanced in Australia. The thing that Australians should be proud of, and I think if you look at, for us as a big international telecoms operator, the likes of Cisco, the likes of Microsoft, they all come to us, and when our executives go to Silicon Valley or Palo Alto and they see Microsoft and they see Cisco and Microsoft and these big global players always say, we hold Telstra in high esteem because you're leaders, you're innovators. We've proven things out in Australia and we've taken it globally. So you have your big global partners, but you need your local entrants. And so for us in Indonesia, for example, you've got mature services that you've matured in Australia with Cisco. It could be a unified collaboration platform, for example. But then you get to Indonesia, and Indonesians, they're no good at understanding how to sell services in our industry. So you partner with someone who's got reach, like Telkom. They've got the biggest sales force, the biggest service force, the biggest relationships with customers. Yet we know how to build platforms and deliver. So you sort of, by market, pick number one, number two, whoever's going to help you get to the biggest reach, and use your global platforms to help you get there.
Maybe we could turn our attention to Australia and Singapore, and a lot of these big companies like Telstra have specifically targeted setting up in Singapore with places like muru-D and your investments here in this marketplace. And our friend Malcolm Turnbull, who's the patron of Advance, just announced a $1.1 billion fund for an ideas boom in Australia. Is that enough? Is it too little too late? Will it be significant? And what role can Australia play in collaboration and partnership with all the energy and activity that is taking place in ASEAN and the rest of Asia?
Well, I think, by the way, I'll put it on record, I think he's brilliant for our industry. I think because he came from the background and is himself, a successful business person. I'm not giving political agencies here, but he also is a technologist. He gets it, and he gets why, for example, it's important to have a good infrastructure in Australia to develop. So there's some things that for us as an organisation, it's favourable in terms of the environment it creates. We're really interested in how we can advance Australia. We're really interested in being part of Australian entrepreneurs who want to come out of Australia. I still think there's limitations. I think the tax rates in Australia make it prohibitive. If it's difficult, there's still issues. But then the issue for Australia is also distance. But if we can get infrastructure right, that reduces. But I do think that there's rivals around the world. So, for example, I was in India 2 weeks ago, and the Indian government has cottoned onto it. India, if the British started bureaucracy, they perfected it, the Indians, right? But Modi has now announced that you can start a company in a day in India. Now that changes the dynamics of what's possible in India, because it would normally take you a year, maybe 2 years, and then you're not really going to get much entrepreneurism, are you? So, but that's changed, and so I think you'll see India emerging. So I think Australia's got a right to play, but it needs to be respectful to the fact that if you start something in India and you get it right, you've got 1.2 billion. If you start something in China like Jack Ma, and you start on domestic consumption. So I think our job and our role in it, and while we're trying to stay part of that community, is how do we help an Australian entrepreneur have the right environment to succeed, and then to launch its ideas to markets where there's more population. Because at the end of the day, if you're a startup, you're likely to be in consumer or trying to get to consumer where you need scale. And unfortunately, 24 million still doesn't cut it if you're against China or India. So, yeah, we're optimistic. We're confident. We think it's the right things to do, and we're working closely in partnership to see how we can do it. You know?
Can Australia replicate a Tel Aviv? And also Singapore is the same. Can we kind of work in a world where we are borderless? I mean, one of the Telstra reports said we do like to work in our geographies, and actually working outside of geographies wasn't so easy. So is that one of the barriers for us?
Well, I mean, as an operator of telecom infrastructure, we connect countries, right? So, by the way, our last report last year was called Connected Countries. So we're progressing from telling people how we can connect countries to digital. Look, Tel Aviv, like some of these other geographies, are amazing. What they've done it. What's the mindset that enables that? And I mean, I self-confess I've never been there. Our board, the whole of our board and our senior leadership team just went on a trip. They went to Tel Aviv and Estonia, and then into Europe. And actually, muru-D, we've just signed literally last week a partnership agreement with another accelerator in Tel Aviv. So we recognise it and we embrace it. I think Singapore can. I sometimes wonder, maybe this is a bit controversial with Singaporeans in the room, I sometimes wonder whether the education system holds it back. That's the thing. It's not whether the infrastructure there, it's whether is the mindset there to create innovation. And that's just a big question for Singapore.
So when we're talking about entrepreneurs, and you look at people like Google who are launching their new products in Indonesia, so we're talking about entrepreneurs coming here. When you look at the major players who are already focused on this region. So you look at India, Google are launching the first ever online bin offline. You look at Indonesia and all the new products that they're looking at. So now it's becoming an even more convoluted space. Yeah. So you've got startups competing with the major players. In terms of what you were talking about talent, this is absolutely one of my passion points. I do believe the talent is here.
I would say something that Andrew and I were talking about earlier in the week, which is when you focus on the technology or the digital or the pipe or any of those things, you end up getting lost. Yeah. You're following the wrong stream. When you focus on the customer experience, when you focus on what actually you're trying to disrupt and benefit from a customer and work backwards from that, you tend to then find the right partners who can help you on that journey. And we did an exercise the other day. We got some people in the room, some clients in the room. We kind of said, so what problem are we trying to solve? And they all said, we know, there's 20 visitors, we know what problem we're trying to solve. So we got them all to write it on a post-it note, or stick on the wall, 15 different answers. So we spent some time just working through what actually we're trying to disrupt. What customer benefit will there be? And then with that, you can go forward to the market and say, what partnerships, what people, what technology, how can they help me sort of reinvent that space? And I think Andrew is right also, which is no certainties. You're going to find dead ends. It's a bit like dating. There will be some sort of bad dates, and you're going to have to work through that process. But keep your eye on the customer experience.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think sort of you can deliver your business plan. You say you're going to reach a certain target number of sales in a certain time period, but the reality here is definitely different. Sales cycle is much longer. I think we've kind of done some analysis, and we need to meet with a client at least 7 times before they'll actually buy our services. And you know, that's a cultural difference. You know, the first few meetings with the client might be them getting to know you, establishing the relationship. It's very, very different to Australia, where you know, you identify a need, you can solve that problem, and then essentially it's a lot easier to sign a deal. So it's a very valid point. You do need to educate your investors or your board back in Australia that business will take longer here. You have to be patient, and you do have to have the support and the funding to allow you to expand.
Yeah, we had an offsite last week, as we do, and a lot of discussions around how we can become agile and lean and all those other words. I'm sure everyone in this room has written on a board somewhere. And we talked about an interesting idea of moving away from projects to products. So why overlabour things with project status, which means to build fat into things and build bureaucracy into things as well, and think of them as more as products rather than projects. That mindset is interesting. Having said that, we went through this amazing 2 days, and then the Monday morning everything went back to normal. So the CIO was livid yesterday when he sat in the meeting and said, we still had this crappy waterfall conversation about trying to deliver this thing, and they gave me mountains of data, and just last week we were all in the room together talking about how we could just flip things on the fly and do it quickly and whatever. So the talk is one thing, the doing is another. It is deeply cultural, it is management driven, it's nothing else. And you've got to rip the band off really hard and fast quickly. And banks like ours, which are decades, hundreds of years old, they don't change very quickly, which is a problem because the industry is changing super fast. So I don't have an answer because I'm worried about it, and the industry is worried about it, and we are scrambling a little bit to react to that. And if we talk to banks back home, NAB, ANZ, Combank, those guys, they're kind of cracking it much better than banks here. But the banks here are doing a good job at least confronting it or talking about it or owning up to it. There are some very conservative organisations in this region. They need to change their culture really fast, from being a family business that just cranks out money for their Bentleys to being genuine regional organisations that are agile and move fast.
Yeah, a couple of points on this for us, because this is, I would say, our third wave of international expansion for Telstra. So we've connected Australia to the world for 100 years, being the first telegraph, being whatever it may be, carrier pigeon through to, you know. And the thing is, every country has long memories, that's the other thing. So after the war in Vietnam, Telstra rebuilt the telecoms infrastructure for Vietnam. And whenever any of our senior execs go to Vietnam, they're lauded as gods, because we helped rebuild something and connect them. However, we left, and they remember us leaving. And the same in Indonesia. I remember having a conversation in Indonesia when we were about to do this JV with a guy from Tees, Leighton's Tees, and he'd been there 25 years. And I said, hey, really good news, we're coming back, we're going to do this. He said, how long are you going to stay for this time? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I've been here 25 years and I built your last JV infrastructure and you're pissed off about 5 years into it. And so I think for me, one thing is you need longevity, and memories last long, and sovereign memories last even longer, and they remember you for the good and the bad. And so what we've really built into that, and including the people that we've hired in Australia, particularly now in the executive level, is people who have built businesses, run businesses in Asia.
Look, I think it's a double-edged sword. I think if you read the press, there's big headwinds coming towards our industry in particular. You know, soft numbers from China, soft numbers from lots of Southeast Asia, America having a random election this year, and I think the industry, even our own CEO, has got some sort of neutral position at this point. I think we're a bit worried. But the flip side is that is just a huge opportunity for this digital business, and that's why people like DBS and especially even Telstra, are being really proactive in trying to position themselves to be open to digital solutions. And fintech will either completely dominate or completely fall apart. That's a bit of a random statement, but it'll either work or it won't work.
It's binary, huh?
Yeah, it is a bit because it's not as protected from the big buffeting winds of economic storm, but it'll produce the solutions. If things go really badly, fintech will sweep in and be a hugely cheap, efficient way to solve a bunch of problems. Otherwise, it'll be back to what's a flight to safety, or what's it called? Flight to safety. So that'll be a massive thing to watch this year for us. But I think it'll be a really exciting year regardless.
Anna?
I think sort of in terms of negativity, I don't think it's as bad as the media is painting. Yes, capital markets are down, so in terms of sort of raising funds from a startup perspective, that could be a challenge. However, there are big businesses sitting on a lot of cash. Look at Apple and Alibaba's cash reserves. So it's not like there isn't money there to spend. So from our perspective, from a startup perspective, I think it's actually really great to ride through the storm. So if you can come out at the end successful, you've got a really proven business model, and you can sort of ride anything.
And I agree. So for the past 2 years, we've been named the #1 chapter globally. The first time ever outside the US, Europe and the UK. And what we've started is any indication, I think 2016 is going to be the year, not just for Singapore, but for Asia.
Well, hideously optimistic there.
I'm an idealist.
Okay.
My job is
Right.
conference.
Last word from Andrew, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I personally am bullish actually. It doesn't faze me. I go to China. I was in China last week. I was in India the week before. I see massive opportunity. I think you've got to be focused though, and I think there's risk in mature markets. So I would say, in Australia, I think it is a challenge. I really believe that the competition's heating up, the price pressure comes on, and when you're a big company like ours, that's a challenge. But I think the opportunity is if you're focused in the market outside Australia, I think it's just a world of opportunity. And also if you're inquisitive like us, cash prices are coming down to buy things. So that's
Well, okay, so in that case, I think the panelists will be around for a little while longer. You can always grab them afterwards. So a round of applause.